Welcome to Sproutcast, where we speak with changemakers, social innovators, and entrepreneurs about how to make the world a better place. And now, here's your host, Julia Duffy.
Welcome back to Sproutcast. My name is Julia Duffy, and today we're speaking with Tony Nicholls, Director of Good Talent Media Training. Tony is an accomplished journalist who has held roles over the last 10 years with the ABC, SBS and Network 10, covering thousands of news stories across Victoria, Australia and the international media. Tony has seen firsthand how the media landscape has evolved, changing the roles of journalists, politicians and media spokespeople, and he's on the show today to talk to us about how non-profit organisations can improve and maximise their engagement with the media. Welcome to Sproutcast, Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Well, so given your history working in media and training others to work in the media, I'm interested in discussing with you how organisations can maximise on communicating with the media and sharing their stories and what skills they might need for this. But before we jump into that, I did want to start by asking you a little bit about your background in relation to how you first interacted with the non-profit sector, kind of what are your first impressions of that and how maybe have those changed over time?
Yeah, well, thank you, Julia. Well, there's a lot to chat about. And since I've been consulting, I started consulting this year, and that's been an exciting change for me. I've spent 10 years working in newsrooms, and I described that recently as living life in overdrive or in fifth gear. It's like you're living your working life charged by adrenaline and thinking it's normal, actually, and not necessarily understanding the work pace or the different working cultures outside of newsrooms. In saying that, it was an exciting time, sort of living to deadline. So when you're working in radio, you've got half-hour deadlines that you're working toward. And then I was at the ABC when we launched News 24. And then all of a sudden we had deadlines every moment of the day. So it was quite exciting. So it was a massive shift for me to get into consulting, and an exciting one to share my expertise as a media specialist. And I must say, it came as quite a surprise to me as to how little really practical media knowledge people had outside of the industry. And then it came as quite a surprise to me also as to the resource restrictions that not-for-profits had to deal with in launching their projects, dealing with their constituents, and engaging in the media. So I certainly have seen the not-for-profit space as a challenging space, an exciting space, and one that really requires a lot of innovation to have any success, clearly. So I work with a number of not-for-profits right now, including the Islamic Council of Victoria, the Victorian Women's Trust, amongst others, and they're great clients, and we're working really closely together on a number of projects.
Wonderful. So you mentioned, Tony, that non-profit organisations often have a limitation in resources, especially, I guess, in this area. Other than that, do you think that non-profits need to or should work any differently with the media than kind of more traditional for-profit organisations?
I guess the budgetary restrictions demands that not-for-profits have to work differently with the media because you're restricted in that you can't afford enormously expensive advertisement campaigns or media buys of any sort. So I think not-for-profits really do need to focus on their objectives. I mean, when I'm working with organisations, I take a lot of steps backwards, really try to clarify vision, mission, very, very clear objectives, which are specific, measurable, verifiable, and then we go from there. So it really depends project by project what the not-for-profit is working toward before we really start talking about a communication strategy and specifically on how to deal with the media.
And I was thinking particularly, I guess, also about some of the concerns that the leadership of a non-profit organisation might also have around the risks involved in engaging with the media. I think a lot of them are really conscious of the impressions that the general community might have of their organisation and the importance of their reputation. Could you speak perhaps a little about how to manage these risks when engaging with the media?
Yeah, that's a good question, Julia, actually. And I think it just comes back to capacity and actual knowledge of the media space as it is now and how to deal with it successfully. I was quite shocked when I started doing media workshops this year, and we'd start the workshop off with what people want to achieve for the day and how they're feeling about the day ahead of them. And the majority of feedback I would get at the start of workshops is people are absolutely terrified of dealing with the media. So that they've got the fear and risk, and it really was potentially muting any of the potential success that they could have. I think that fear is a big problem, and I think that fear is rooted in ignorance and a real lack of knowledge of the media space. And I think that's a big concern for organisations. I think if you're sitting back and you're not for profit and you're in a leadership position and you're scared of dealing with the media, I think you've got a problem on your hands because potentially the not for profit that you're in is doing lots of great work, really helping the community, and because of a lack of ability or willingness to expand your skill set and augment your professional development and learn about a new space in order to act in that space successfully. Because of that inability to dive in and learn some new skills, your organisation's actually going to suffer because you're not going to be able to use the media to tell the public about the great work that you're doing. So I don't think it's good enough to sit back and say, oh, I'm scared about the media and I'm frightened about my reputation. I think that's quite a pathetic position to hold. I think as a leader of your not-for-profit, you should be standing up and acknowledging the media as being extremely powerful, acknowledging the media as being a conduit to your audiences, to your clients, a conduit to increasing your funding, a conduit to being a bigger organisation. And I think you need to stand up and take that opportunity and become a big, loud, positive voice for your organisation. And if you don't have the skills to do that, you need to find a spokesperson who does.
So you mentioned earlier, Tony, about media engagement as part of a broader communication strategy. How would that fit together, do you think? What role in the communication strategy does media engagement play?
Well, potentially a massive role, Julia, and it needs to wind back to the specific project that you're in, but potentially an enormous role because we've got a population of 24 million people here in Australia, and there's 30 million smartphones registered. You've got half of the population now getting all of their news off social media. So the media engagement on social media is enormous. The media engagement in traditional media, whilst waning, is still significant. Combine the two, and you've got all of the purchasing public engaged in some sort of media. So if you're putting together a comms campaign, you need to be addressing the media because that's the conduit or the pathway to your audiences, to your clients, and to your revenue bases. So I find it quite an exciting part of my work, actually. I started out this year as an ex-television and radio journalist who can help people from traditional media and perform well. But that role has really expanded this year, right into PR strategy, right into comms campaigns, right into social media and digital media campaigns. And that I'm finding that that's what most of my clients are really after. They've got great ideas, they're representing great organisations, but therein lies the opportunity to get those positive stories out into the public domain, and you do that through comms strategies.
And what types of specific skills are you teaching people in order to to kind of maximize that strategy. What do you think that people need assistance with that maybe they don't even realize?
It's very multi-layered, depending upon the spokespeople and the not-for-profits that I'm dealing with. From a traditional media sense, if you just get back to that, what you mentioned before about people just being terrified of being involved in the media and terrified of having it going backwards and having their reputation affected, I think it's so important before you engage the media in any way is that you have a clear goal to achieve and therefore some clear messages to deliver. So your messages in your media campaign, whether that be you fronting a camera or a radio mic or you engaging in social media, your messages are essentially what you want the public to believe. And they need to be delivered in a way that's media friendly. So you can have a great story to tell, but if you don't have some really media friendly, concise, quotable and memorable messages, your story could become very convoluted and very messy and very hard to follow, and therefore no one's going to engage with it. So just off the cuff, it's so important to get the media messages right, concise, memorable and quotable. And it sounds very easy, and it rolls off the tongue very easily to say that, but I do whole workshops, in fact, that can take all day or at least half a day in nutting down what an organisation's messages might be. And once we get the messages right, we need to deliver them in a way that the media can use them, and you need to have a broader story, in fact, to back messages up. So messages are usually supported by great anecdotes, examples, rationales, or research that's supported by data. So yes, you need a really strong story to tell. It needs to boil down into some media-friendly messages, and those messages need to be supported, ideally by some personal and even better emotional stories, or some research and some data which makes these messages real and understandable and believable. So there's lots of steps, and that's just one part of it, just when it comes down to messaging, which I find really exciting to work on for organisations. So take, for example, your non-for-profit. You're doing fantastic work, and you're working 80 hours a week on big projects, but the benefit of these projects need to be communicated in a way that the media can write quite simply, and therefore the public can understand.
Excellent. And can you think of any examples of organisations that you think are doing this really well?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's a good interview technique, and that's a great way to communicate in the media as well, to talk about examples and stories, and that's what people are interested in. So when I'm coaching people, whether it be for public speaking or for fronting the media, you need to be telling powerful and interesting stories, and that's going to engage people. It's tough for me to tell some of my stories with my clients because obviously a lot of that's confidential. And so
maybe anything that you've observed in the media landscape, or just organisations
so not-for-profits communicating well.
Yeah.
It's a tough one, because it's a space that's highly competitive, and there's so many different organisations trying to get their messages out there. But things that pop to mind, some massive campaigns that we'll all know about. So, for instance, the Ice Bucket Challenge just recently for motor neuron disease. I mean, who knew much about motor neuron disease prior to the Ice Bucket Challenge? Now, that was very clever, and it used a lot of really simple techniques which made their audience the stars of their campaigns. So it involved shared content, it involved fun, it involved humour. Who would have thought that the Ice Bucket Challenge was really about such a serious condition? And we all learnt a lot about motor neuron disease as a result. They were really clever because they used a lot of ambassadors and key influencers that we knew in our local cities, and they did all that around the world. So it might have been Neil Danaher here in Melbourne, but in every major city all around the world, they had their own ambassadors that got on the front foot talking about motor neuron disease, participating in the Ice Bucket Challenge. So Very clever campaign. Now, it was an enormous campaign. It went worldwide. People were falling over themselves to participate in the campaign. And it was clever and successful for a lot of reasons. Involved social media, encouraged audiences to participate, to be the star of their own campaign, to film their own ice bucket challenges. And therefore, and then flowing from that, you and I could do it, Julia, if we wanted to post it online. Our friends could follow us, our friends could share the content, but celebrities were doing it all over the world as well. And then on top of all that excitement and momentum, some ambassadors popped up to talk about what motor neuron disease is all about and how people could contribute money and the like. That's just one example. And without going into detail, Movember put men's mental health and prostate cancer on the map by creating a really fun event which men could participate in. Men could grow mows, do something silly, do something fun. Again, very serious issues which were looked at in a light-hearted and humorous way that cut through and captured the public's attention. The CEO Sleep Out, so St. Vincent's de Paul, a fantastic event targeted at CEOs, so targeted at the privileged, giving them an experience, so an experiential marketing campaign of sleeping out and experiencing what it might be like to be homeless. And therefore, off the back of that, so if our CEO was Raf Goldsworthy, let's say, and he was sleeping out, we could sponsor him, we could support him, we could share the content of his experience. A great concept. And just let me conclude, another great campaign you might have seen a year or so ago was called Like a Girl. Now, the Like a Girl campaign was extremely powerful. It didn't come from a not-for-profit, but it came from a Canadian airline. And they had the aim of boosting girls' confidence during that really tough time during puberty. And they had that specific target audience. And they also had the aim of changing that affirmation being like a girl, which is seen to be a negative affirmation, into a positive affirmation. So why is like a girl a negative affirmation? It shouldn't be. It should be a positive affirmation, right? Because there's nothing wrong with being a girl. So they targeted that specific affirmation. They created some amazing content. They filmed some young girls and talked about what it's like to be a girl, what it's like to run like a girl, swim like a girl, punch like a girl, fight like a girl. And these little girls turned that around into something enormously positive. And that content, and Julia, it can be a lot about creating shareable content. And they created some content which is very emotional, very powerful. It challenged an affirmation has been negative and should be positive. And that content flew around the world as well and made a massive impact on people's perceptions, all for a great cause also. So there's a few examples, and which I guess all fall into the category of experiential marketing, whereby people get to have an experience and be part of something. And that can be a great way for a not-for-profit to go about things.
Wonderful. Well, those are some fantastic examples there, Tony. Mostly, I guess, of quite established organisations who are engaging well.
Let me challenge you on that. I think you sit back with the perception that these organisations are quite established on the back of them having extremely successful events. I mean, I don't think motor neuron disease, the people behind raising money or doing research for motor neurons disease have been really established at all prior to having a successful experiential marketing campaign. I don't think the guys at St. Vincent's de Paul, who had their cans out on the streets trying to raise money, would have considered themselves very established at all prior to the public thinking that they're really established now, because they've had a really successful event in the CEO Sleep Out. And the same applies for Movember. The guys behind Movember were going nowhere in a hurry prior to actually putting their thinking caps on and being brave enough to back an event that really engaged their target audience, that being men, in creating Movember. So I think that's a bit of a trap, Julia, that we can think just because someone's been successful in a comms campaign that no, that doesn't apply to us because we're little guys and they're big guys. I mean, it wasn't long ago they were little guys. And it's, in fact, that perception I come across a lot in dealing with a lot of my clients. Oh, no, it's not possible for us to achieve these things. We're only a not-for-profit. Oh, it's not possible for us to achieve these things. You know, we're a not-for-profit and we don't have much money. But in fact, if you get the elements of your campaign right, you can achieve all these things. And it does take some courage. But who would have thought for a moment that whoever came up with the Movember idea, who would have thought that, oh, I've got an idea to raise awareness for prostate cancer and mental health for men, that will get guys to grow mows, and we do that in November and we call it Movember. You would have thought that person would have been laughed out of the room. Quite an odd and out there idea. But it was that idea that drove that campaign that now makes this organisation look really big and established. So there is a perception that a lot of not-for-profits that I've dealt with seem to have, is that we're not capable of much. We can't achieve much. We're only not-for-profits. I think you need to take that hat off in order to be successful.
So how would a new organisation plan out and develop their communication plan and their, I guess, strategy for engaging with the media? What would you say would be the first steps for that, for someone setting up a new organisation?
So I guess it would be more helpful for me if you give me a project. So give me a project to think about, give me a target audience to think about, and then it becomes clear what media that target audience would engage in, and then I can start throwing some ideas at you.
Yeah, so a lady who I interviewed for the podcast quite recently, Jessica McPherson, they have a couple of years under their belt now, but they're called St Kilda Mums, and it's a small organisation that collects unwanted or excess baby equipment, clothing, things for babies and toddlers that people don't need, and they provide them to social workers who then distribute them to disadvantaged mothers who maybe aren't able to get all of the things that they need to look after their child.
Okay, all right. So first thing I do is think visually. So working in television so long, I think, okay, what would work for television? Let's say, just for me as a starting point in my thinking. And straight away I think, first time I've heard this concept, is I think, okay, if this organisation was to get hundreds of kids or hundreds of babies in one location, then you've got something that would look good on television, and you could get a number of camera crews to an event centred around hundreds and hundreds, let's say a couple hundred would be okay, babies, let's say in Federation Square. And so they're not toddlers running around, they're babies on a blanket, so to speak. So then that's visual, and if I saw that press release come into the newsroom, you'd have me thinking, straight away I'd be thinking, oh, that will look good for TV. That is and because TV needs to be visual, that's the starting point for a story. So if you think laterally and think visually, you're going to get journalists interested in your concept, but then you have to have a story to back it up, because you're providing a background that will look good for telly, but what are we going to write? What are we going to say? So step one, I'm thinking of an event in every major, what's St Kilda Mums, isn't it? So it's an event, couple hundred babies somewhere in St Kilda. So say it's on St Kilda Beach, we're coming into summer now, the weather's good, or somewhere in St Kilda. So then we get there and you've got some really strong spokespeople that can communicate your story. You've got a big event that looks good. Well, it's not often you see a couple hundred babies in one spot. Then you've got the opportunity to share that social media content, share that footage or those photos. And then you need to develop some messaging that the media might be interested in, which supports your story. So you told me your story there, but I think there's a day workshop or a half-day workshop in working out what the messages are or what the calls to action are for the public. If this organisation's doing some great things, how can the public be involved, and the way you go from there. So first thing, though, is create some events. Mm-hmm. Create some events that are interesting and visual, and then I think you'll get the media interested.
And for new organisations, communicating the vision of their organisation with the media and with the community is really important, as you just mentioned there. And you talked about perhaps a workshop or something like that to hone the messages. Could you think of any other kind of practical skills that are particularly important at this stage of an organisation's development to get their message out there?
I think we sit around in our organisations thinking our vision's important, but really I think it's important to apply the so what test to our ideas. So what? We think in the four walls of our building, these things are so important. But do they actually matter to anyone else? So I think when you start asking yourself, so what, from the perspective of your customers, from the perspective of your members, from the perspective of Mr. and Mrs. Joe Public, then I think our vision, our stories and our messages will get better and better, because we're forced upon saying so what to actually change our ideas and our concepts to those that the public or our audience might be actually interested in. So really from a news perspective, I mean, we'd be binning press releases, non-stop, couldn't get enough skips in the building, because all of these organisations are sending us stuff that they really care about. But we first paragraph, first sentence, we can see, well, the public not going to care about this. So we just bin it. So I think you just have to be so clear. So I think you really need to test your thinking all the time. And so whether it be the vision of your organisation or what you're trying to achieve with specific projects, it's really got to matter to the public. So we call that cutting through. It has to cut through and it has to matter. Otherwise, no one's going to be interested and we're certainly not going to cover it in any news item. And I think your audience members aren't going to be interested either. So we call it cutting through. So things need to cut through, and things normally cut through, Julia, in a media sense. You're much more likely to have your concepts and ideas cut through and be interesting and matter to people when they are emotional. So as human beings, we are emotional beings. Now, we are swimming in content now. I mean, we can listen to this podcast. Our audience right now can cut out of this whenever they like and pick up interesting, engaging and emotional content, whether that be on their iPhone or anywhere else. So what we need to do as organisations is ensure that we are inspiring our audiences to feel something. And if our messages are tapping into our audience's emotions and getting our audience to feel something, like the Like a Girl campaign, like the ice bucket challenge, because we feel for the people suffering from that condition so much. If we're feeling something as an audience or a client or a customer, we're much more likely to be more engaged and stick with you and actually support your organisation. If we're not feeling anything, and if it doesn't matter to us, why would we spend 5 seconds looking at your organisation's material? It would just mean absolutely nothing to me.
Okay, so I wanted to wrap up today with a slightly different question. You mentioned that you've just kind of undergone a transition yourself, stepping out of a more traditional media role into starting your own training organisation. And I thought maybe some of your experience in doing that may be helpful to our listeners who are also going through a transition, perhaps either starting a new organisation or joining a board for the first time, or just starting a new project. So I wanted to ask you how you work on making your ideas come to life. So you had this idea to start this training program, and how did you jump into that and make that a reality?
Yeah, well, thank you for concluding on that question. I think that's a good one. I think the easiest businesses that you can start are ones that are obviously closely aligned to your skill set and your contacts and your recent working history. So coming out of 10 years of radio and television, it became really obvious to me in my last year of television at the ABC that I could use my extensive contact list across a lot of different organisations and sectors, that I could flip that contact list around potentially into my own business. So 12 months out from leaving the ABC, I realised that this was a possibility and started working on it. So I'd spent all of my working life interviewing people. I've interviewed thousands of people, and I've forgotten most of the interviews that I've done. But what I've done, what interviewers need to do, good ones, they need to really help their talent that they're interviewing, the interviewees, help them perform and perform well. Because when journos bring interviews back to the office, journos are judged on the quality of the interviewee's performance. If that interviewee is not watchable, doesn't have clear messages, is all over the show, I mean, people just sit back and look at that journo as if they're useless. So what journos or good journos naturally do is coach and help their interviewees perform the best that they can perform. So I realised that that was a real core skill of mine, something that I enjoyed doing and was really good at. So I figured that I could use my really big contact list and my natural coaching skills and turn it into a business.
Wonderful. That's great to hear. Before I let you go, Tony, I also just wanted to give the opportunity to let our listeners know how they can get in contact with you if they had any questions about anything you've said today, or if they wanted to find out more about what you do.
Yeah, great. You can get me through my website, goodtalent.com.au, so all the W's, goodtalent, one word, .com.au, and you can pick up the phone. I don't mind you doing that. I don't think enough organisations have a direct mobile to the decision maker. And I'm on email as well, obviously, tony@goodtalent.com.au.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today, Tony, and providing some excellent insights and advice. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
No problems, Julia. Thank you for having me. And if I may say, I think you're good talent on your end of the microphone as well.
Thank you so much.
Did you enjoy this episode of Sproutcast? Visit sproutcast.net to sign up for our newsletter. The newsletter includes copies of the show notes and additional content from each episode.